I will now call this meeting to order. For everybody, can you please put your all your telephones on vibrate or off for the meeting duration. In order to call attendance, I will now conduct roll call by calling each counselor's name. Counselors, when I call your name, please say here. Counselor Aquilina.
Here.
Counselor Beauregard. Counselor Bogner.
Here.
Counselor Bruno.
Here.
Counselor Danch. Counselor Elliott.
Here.
Counselor Hoyle.
Here.
Okay, now we'll move to the adoption of agenda. Mover Counselor Hoyle, seconder by Counselor Elliott, that the public meeting agenda dated March 7th, 2023 be confirmed as circulated. If any counselor has any questions about the agenda, please raise your hand now. Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Motion is carried. Disclosures of interest. Does any counselor has a conflict of interest they wish to disclose?
Mark, do you have to include it?
No.
I think that's what
He's gone.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Statutory public meetings. We will now proceed with item 4.1, proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. Port Colborne Quarries, Pit 3 expansion, files D09-02-21 and D14-09-21, 2023-42. Mover, Counselor Aquilina, seconder, Counselor Bruno. In attendance tonight, for the people in the audience, our Niagara Region staff, Eric Axe, Manager of Community Planning, Sean Norman, Senior Planner, Melanie Horton, Aggregate Advisor for the JART from Esser Planning and City of Port Colborne, Planning Division staff, Mr. David Schultz, who's our Senior Planner, and Denise Landry, who is our Chief Planner for the City of Port Colborne. I give it to Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and good evening to you and council and members of the public in council chambers and watching at home. The purpose of this meeting is pursuant to sections 22 and 34 of the Planning Act, and to consider an application submitted by David Sisko of IBI Group on behalf of the owner, Port Colborne Quarries, for the lands known as part of lots 17, 18, 19, concession 2, formerly in the township of Humberstone, now in the City of Port Colborne, Regional Municipality of Niagara, and located on the north side of Main Street East, Highway 3, south of 2nd Concession Road and west of Miller Road. The application for official plan amendment proposes to change the designation of the subject lands from agricultural to mineral aggregate operation. The application also proposes to add a special policy area to permit the proposed expansion of the quarry. The application for zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of the subject lands from agricultural to mineral aggregate operation, as well as reduce the minimum setback from a provincial highway from 90 meters to 30 meters. Staff would like to note that the Niagara region is currently reviewing a regional official plan amendment for the subject lands, which proposes text and schedule changes to add the subject land to the site-specific policies of the Niagara official plan in order to facilitate an expansion of the existing quarry. A separate public meeting will be held at the Niagara Region Planning and Economic Development Committee meeting tomorrow, which is March 8th at 1 p.m. Additionally, the applicant has also filed an application for a Category 2 below water quarry Class A license to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry under the Aggregate Resources Act. The Aggregate Resources Act application process includes a separate public consultation and notification process. Notice of the public meeting was administered in accordance with sections 22 and 34 of the Planning Act as amended, and Ontario Regulations 543/06 and 545/06. Notice of the public meeting was circulated to required agencies previous commenters on February 7th, 2023. The notice was also placed in the Niagara This Week newspaper on February 9th, 2023. Meeting details have been provided along with the council agenda on the city's website and under current applications. Staff have received a number of comments from members of the public through prior circulations of the Aggregate Resources Act notification and open house held in 2021. All public comments, including comments received through this public meeting process, will be included and considered through staff's recommendation report. The procedure to be followed this evening will be to present Development and Legislative Services Department Planning Division Report 2023-42, receive questions of clarification from Council, open the meeting to the public for comments, and announce the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of adoption and passage of the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. At this time, I would like to present Planning Division Report 2023-42. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located on the north side of Highway 3 East and bounded by the existing Port Colborne Quarries Pit 3 to the west, 2nd Concession Road to the north, and Miller Road to the east. The surrounding land uses are predominantly agricultural and residential. A total area of 106.29 hectares is subject to the application, of which 71.12 hectares are proposed to be extracted. Next slide, please. The City of Port Colborne official plan designates the lands as agricultural. Land uses in the agricultural designation are primarily used for agricultural purposes. Next slide, please. The official plan amendment proposes to change the agricultural designation to mineral aggregate operation, as well as add a special policy area to permit the proposed expansion of the quarry. Next slide, please. These subject lands are currently zoned agricultural. The agricultural zone permits accessory agricultural activities, agricultural uses, agritourism and value-added uses, cannabis production facilities, conservation uses, detached dwellings, kennels, and uses, structures, and buildings accessory thereto. Next slide, please. The application for zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of the subject lands from agricultural to mineral aggregate operation, as well as reduce the minimum setback from a provincial highway from 90 meters to 30 meters. Next slide, please. At this time, Your Worship, are there any questions of clarification from Council to planning staff?
Councilors, any question to Mr. Schultz?
Okay. I will, now I think we will go to the applicant for their presentation, and then I'll read the passage and open the meeting to the public.
I'll just make one announcement, Mr. Schultz. 8 written submissions pertaining to this item have been received by the clerk's office and were distributed to council prior to tonight's meeting. Okay.
At this point, we'd like to call up the applicant to speak.
You knew to push the red button. You must have been here before.
Yes, a few times. Okay. Good evening, Deputy Mayor, members of council, and those members of the public who are here who have taken interest in these applications. My name is David Sisko, and I'm a senior planner with Arcadis RBI from their Waterloo office. And for 4 decades, I've specialized in agri-resource planning throughout much of Ontario. With me tonight to respond to any of your questions are from Port Colborne Quarry, Sean Tiley and John McClellan, as well as from WSP Golder is Sean McFarlane, who is our project team groundwater expert. I plan to keep my comments brief, but hope to provide some additional detail and context to the planned quarry expansion, and trust that I don't repeat some of the comments provided by Mr. Schultz. Thanks. Next one. So a bit about the history of the existing quarry. Quarrying initially began on the subject lands sometime between 1954 and 1955 under the ownership of the Grey Nuns, with extraction focused only on the western portion of the site nearest Highway 140 and totaled about 67 hectares. Shortly thereafter, the lands were purchased by the Canada Steamship Lines, and under their ownership, quarrying activity escalated as it's believed that during their peak production years, the quarry had as many as 60 employees with an annual production of 2 million tons, and that is a very significant volume. By 1971, when provincial legislation was introduced to oversee extraction as a land use, the initial quarry lands had been completely exhausted of the aggregate reserves, all within 16 years. About 1954, the quarry then expanded eastward into what is referred to as pits 2 and 3, being 73 hectares and 70 hectares respectively. These two parcels are separated by Babian Road. Rankin Construction purchased the lands in 2007. Final extraction of some small pockets of stone within pit 2 were just completed in the last year or two, but the vast majority of the final side slope rehabilitation has been completed in pit 2. Extraction of pit 3 has been the focus for the past decade, and now with less than 2 years of stone reserves remaining. In terms of the activity on the quarry, currently the quarry employs about 20 full-time employees, along with approximately 100 truck drivers that support the quarry. The quarry supplies 2 large concrete plants, and it's estimated that half the new homes in the Niagara region are supplied by this quarry, as well as half the bridges and roads also supplied by this quarry. So the retention of these jobs hinges on the quarry expansion before you. In terms of market distribution, approximately 95% of the stone from the quarry is used within the Niagara region. About 15% serves the local market, Port Colborne area, but as you can appreciate, the local market is not large, especially when you consider the size of the quarry. The balance is shipped throughout the Niagara Peninsula, with much of that being used internally by Rankin. So that leaves about 5% that is shipped out of the region. Some is by truck, but because the quarry almost abuts the Welland Canal, Port Colborne Quarry is in a unique and ideal location that provides them aggregate sales throughout the Great Lakes. Next. So in terms of the quarry expansion, the current application is to expand the quarry further eastward towards Miller Road. And this will see an additional 71 hectares of land being licensed, but would exclude all environmentally sensitive lands and wetlands. Currently, the existing quarry is permitted to extract just over 1.8 million tons of stone per year. But the request for the Pit 3 extension would see a 45% reduction in that annual permit to just 1 million tons. Taking into consideration that the quarry expansion holds about 45 million tons of reserve, the quarry can continue to supply the local and regional construction needs for the next 40 to 45 years. Next. Thanks. In terms of some of the highlights of the application, the existing processing plant within Pit 1, so over towards Highway 140, will be relocated to the Pit 3 area, which will increase efficiency and help reduce the quarry's carbon footprint. However, to relocate the processing plant, so that includes the crushing, the screening, and the washing process, this will be a substantial financial commitment and a significant logistical exercise for Port Colborne quarries. There'll be a new entrance and scale on a Highway 3 directly, which will be directly across from Weaver Road. There'll be no access onto Miller Road or Second Concession Road. There's numerous mitigation tools have been incorporated into the site plans to address every conceivable operational scenario to mitigate against key land use compatibility concerns. And these would include things such as noise, blasting, and dust, as well as numerous monitoring wells have been installed with established triggers to safeguard local surface water and groundwater. Key to the mitigation of impacts will be the use of perimeter berms around the entire property. And in step with this application, the City of Port Colborne, as you're aware, has been working through your Wignall Drain Municipal Drain Report. And because these lanes are drained completely by the Wignall Drain, Port Colborne Quarries has been working very cooperatively with your consultant, Paul Marsh. In addition, for the extraction of Phase 1, In the area referred to as the eastern tab towards the Miller Road, a portion of the Wignall drain will be temporarily rerouted, but then reconstructed back to its original location. Next. In terms of final rehabilitation, as extraction is progressively completed, the quarry side slopes will be backfilled with on-site material, and once all extraction is done, the lands will become a lake. Next. So these lands will be merged with the abutting lands to the west and will total 71 hectares and be approximately 8 to 16 meters in depth. Comprehensively, the former Pit 2 lands will also become a lake of a very similar size and depth. Next. In terms of the concerns raised, there have been overall very few individuals who have objected, but some do include the quarry's immediate neighbors. But all of the comments received have been taken very seriously and have been scrutinized, and those issues have been included into the assessment done by both the applicant's project team and perhaps more importantly, being examined by the numerous peer reviewers retained by the joint agency review team, including the city and the region. Next. So over the last 3 or 4 years before this submission, there was preliminary investigations, including detailed studies, assessments, computer modeling, and on-site monitoring. And working through every applicable provincial, regional, and city and conservation authority planning policy, we completed the preparation of the detailed site plans. And next. And for the last 2 full years, we've been working through the planning process with the region and yourself, the city, as well as the Ministry of Natural Resources under the Ag Resources Act. And with the majority of the land use compatibility issues being successfully addressed, these include the groundwater and domestic water well protection, noise, blasting, dust, the potential for but confined soil contamination within the existing Humbersone Speedway, as well as traffic issues, visual impacts, financial and economic impacts, and progressive and post-extraction rehabilitation. Next. So in terms of next steps, there does still remain a small handful of outstanding issues that the quarry project team is working hand in hand with the JART peer reviewers to finalize. And these include some clarification of wetland protection tools and several natural habitat matters, including where the region has requested future input. But at this time, Port Colborne Quarries is anticipating that each final item can be satisfactorily addressed in the next few weeks. Next. So with that, I wish to thank you for your time and interest, and we're available for any questions of council if you have any.
Councilors, any questions? Councilor Aquilina and Councilor Bruno.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to the consultant. I have a few questions, and I apologize because I'm new, and so I'm still learning the quarry ins and outs, and I apologize if this is redundant questions. Some of the answers were through your presentation, but can you confirm is Pit 2 still active?
No. So
okay.
Pit 2 is completely done, correct? John?
It still holds the license.
Yes. So it's still licensed.
Okay.
The rehabilitation is not completed in terms of it hasn't been created to becoming a lake.
Okay.
And there's still traffic cutting through it. But in terms of active extraction, no.
Okay. And so how long until it goes into the lake? Like, what's the time frame with that?
Do you want to?
Would you like to come up in microphone so that people online can hear your reply also? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Councilor Aquilina. When we get a new license for the expansion, we'll get started. We need to bring hydro down. We need to order parts and pieces to put a new place in. We have suggested to the ministry it would be in the 5 to 6 year period to get this a substantial amount of money that needs to get done. There'll be permits, building permits from the city that we'll have to get. So none of this happens overnight. It's, you know, we've got a kilometer of high voltage wires that we have to run through the side of the quarry to get power down there, because Canadian Niagara Power doesn't have three-phase power in that neighborhood. So that's all work. So in our reports, we talk between 5 and 7 years, preferably 5 years. It's better for us the faster it gets done. We're not paying trucks to run from one to the other.
Okay, so that 5-year plan
Yeah,
is to take the crusher from pit 1
everything from
and
pit
move the
1 and
operations
moving it to the existing pit 3.
pit 3.
Yep.
And to create that entrance way up
That
of
entrance
Highway
all has
3.
the same thing. That all has to get, when we start on the south end, the extraction, so we have to build the ramp, blast it as a ramp, clear the top area, get a scale house built, put scales in. That all, we're not gonna get it done in a year or two. That's,
No, okay.
so that's the whole.
Okay, so for all intents and purposes, pit 2 is pretty much done?
It's pretty well done. There was a couple of pockets of rock that the previous owner left and buried. M&R asked us why. We told them because it was kind of expensive to get at it. We weren't, they suggested that we do. So in the last 8 months, we've got most of it. There might be 1 or 2 blasts left to get it out of there, but that was under their direction. We should clear it up and not leave good resources behind.
Okay.
So I can't say they got it all, but it's close.
Okay,
Right.
and so for pit 3 with that license, how many?
So then all our processing for the expansion will
Right.
be done in the existing pit 3. So that will likely be 40 years, right?
With the
Yeah,
expansion.
before it's
Okay.
done, right?
Okay.
So
Pit 2 will be lake water or whatever,
Yeah,
water. And then what happens with pit 1 once the?
So pit 1 is industrial. So it's industrial land. It's, the city has got it zoned as industrial. It always was industrial since before we bought it.
It is not licensed.
It was never licensed, so it didn't, like, it never had a license. It has always been zoned industrial. Currently, we, I think, have 30 hectares that's zoned for a precast concrete plant. It's on hold because we haven't done it, but we had somebody to come in and there would have been 125 jobs there, but it got put to the OMB at the time, and the company couldn't wait. They had to build somewhere else, right?
Okay,
The cities and towns, and I am a counselor in Wakefield, we don't move at the speed of business.
No,
Right?
no.
So they couldn't wait, so they went somewhere else, right? So we lost 125 jobs in this town.
But it's still zoned.
It's still zoned right, but
and so if it's zoned industrial, like they would be in the
yes,
pit,
yes.
but not mining, doing
Not mining, no,
something
it would
else.
be, this was gonna be a precast concrete plant, right? Making pipe, maybe homes, whatever
Okay,
they're in, right?
Okay.
Originally, it was for windmill towers,
okay.
was why we got it done.
Okay. And then the only other question that I had was, okay, maybe, so I thought I had read that there was a site plan agreement for pit 1. No?
No,
That
it's-
does-
it's-
So that
it's not
doesn't,
licensed.
it's,
No,
okay, so
no.
there's no,
It's
okay.
industrial land.
Okay. And then for the setback, that 90 and 30,
Mm-hmm.
can you just explain that to me so I have a better understanding?
So the Ag Resources Act, provincial standards across the province permits 30 meters from a highway. For adjacent to any road is 30 meters. And so we are just coming in compliance with what is permitted across the province is 30 meters.
And so what's the 90?
The 90 is what the the city of Port Colborne has established in the past.
So if I can just really simplify,
Yes.
if you go to RE Law's quarry in Wainfleet,
Okay,
they're 30 meters.
okay,
If you go to ours, our current ones, they're 90 meters. There's 60 meters of aggregate being
So
wasted,
that-
sterilized, right? You can't
Okay.
get it, which is maybe 1 million ton or more, which is a year's worth of running. I'm pretty sure if you go to Ridgemount Quarry in Fort Erie, they're 30 meters. So it's a
They all are.
standard, they all are. Everything is, except for Port Colborne.
okay.
And, you know, that was before we bought it. It was there. We didn't fight to get that changed. We didn't ask for amendment on it. We just lived by it. It was there. But now we need an expansion.
So that 30 meters, like if you're talking about Wainfleet has that in place, and is there like residents
Yeah,
within the
yeah.
quarry that, and is there impacts
No,
to
we don't have
them?
All the study's been done, assuming the 30 meters would be in place.
So all the
Full
information,
mitigation for the 30 meters.
yeah.
Okay,
So that's all been done. I mean, I don't know if you drive up north, but if you drive by Perry Sound, there's quarries by the side of Highway 11, they're 30 meters. You can look down in the quarry as you're driving past them, right? It's just the way it is, right? Which is what the province allows.
okay, thank you for it.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Equity. Councilor Bruno?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to the agent consultant. You mentioned this evening a location for the new entrance on Highway 3 at Weaver Road. And I was wondering how that got arrived at that location. Is that something you have pre-dealt with the ministry to do that? And secondly, will that be a controlled intersection, or would there be merging lanes? How do you see that egress onto Highway 3 being controlled?
There was back and forth with the Ministry of Transportation. There was a initial on the Miller Road with initial design. We came back and dealing with MTO, and we got it onto the highway just to not have onto the local road. And so the requirement will be for an acceleration lane towards to Highway 140, which is where the majority of the traffic will be going. But all the design will be through MTO. Corporate Quarry will be responsible for all the construction costs, for all the design, for all the costs that are involved with that.
So initially, were you saying that you would have preferred Miller Road? And did the region?
MTO was looking at preferring Miller Road, and conversations with the region and MTO, the preference was to have it directly on the provincial highway.
And that was based on the region, was that based on the region objecting to that?
Region, city, I think.
Miller Road?
I don't know whether I'd say objected to it, but there was discussions.
Okay. Thank Through you to the Deputy Mayor. Can I ask a question about one of the comments on the 90-meter setback, but to our planner, or does that come later?
You can ask with Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Through you to Mr. Schultz. Mr. Schultz, that 90-meter setback then, was that something, first off, I guess, when did that go through approval? Like, was it always 30 up to recently, or when was it changed to 90? Would you know?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Councilor Bruno. I don't have that exact date at the top of my head, but I know it was included at least at the time of our new passing of our bylaw in 2018. But I'd have to look back to see if that was something that was included in our former bylaw as well. I don't have that in front of me, though.
That's fine, if you could check in.
Yeah,
Get back to me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Bruno. Mr. Schultz, if you could supply that to all of council, we'd appreciate it.
For sure.
So. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to the presenters. Just touching on what Councillor Bruno asked about the trucks entering Highway 3, will that be restricted to a right-hand turn only if you have an acceleration lane that's going to blend in with traffic?
I don't believe there'll be right turn only, no. But the majority of the trucks will be making a right-hand turn out of the quarry.
Okay. That would be a concern that I would look at. If you're going to turn left and having people that are leaving town without an acceleration lane, with the speed coming past there, may be an issue. And the traffic in the area with the one farm that's across the street that does retail business is could be problematic at times when they're busy on the weekend or busy throughout the summer months. So I would maybe want to have another look at that.
So I can confirm
Yep.
that actually was raised most recently, and for the last couple of days, our traffic engineers have inserted an additional 100 vehicles per day into the model, and there is still not a problem at all with the movements of that access.
Okay. And with an acceleration to turn left out of Miller Road onto Highway 3?
No, just turning right,
Just turning right?
correct.
Okay. You did mention the relocation of the drain. Can you explain where that is and what you're planning on doing with it?
Can you go back?
Is that the temporary one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably slide 6 or 7, the existing conditions, or the operational, slide 5. Next. And the next. There we go. So that's the operational plan. So on what we call the eastern tab, part that sticks out towards Miller Road. So once extraction gets to the Wignall Drain, where it is now, then our discussions with your drainage engineer, Paul Marsh, it's being deemed as a temporary relocation. So the drain would be rerouted along the north part of the property, down Miller Road, and then across the south part of the property. Port Colborne Quarries would then extract that material, backfill it, relocate the drain, and they're committed to doing that within 5 years time window. So the Wignall Drain will be replaced back where it is, and the flow will continue back through there.
So you're talking about the northern extremity of the property?
The eastern,
Down the eastern side, okay, so where that tab sticks out?
yes,
Going towards Miller Road?
yes, because the Wignall Drain cuts right across the middle of that.
Okay, so you're talking about relocating it from how far up on the north side?
Just where it crosses the eastern tab.
Okay, so where are you gonna relocate it to?
It'll go around the outside of that eastern tab.
Okay, and you say 5 years, maybe sort of, or 5 years definitely?
That's the commitment, is 5 years. Correct? Yeah.
And there's permission to do that now? You have permission to do that now?
That's part of the approval process, yes.
Okay, so that's not in stone that you do have permission then?
No,
You're still negotiating with that?
yes, that'll be part of the Wignall Drain approval process after the rezoning.
Okay. On the top tab, on the northern part, it's a real slender piece that sticks out kind of on its own that you show that you're gonna quarry. You have a wider piece in the land that's gonna be zoned for it, but I'll take it that there's one little sliver that sticks up on its own. And it appears that there is a wetland of some kind to the west of that?
Correct.
On the western edge?
Yep. So that would be what we're calling phase 3,
Okay.
that northern little peninsula.
Yep. Have you plans to mitigate any issues with that wetland so that the wetland remains intact?
That's what we've been working through for the last 2 years of this planning process. With the environmentalists, the surface water, the groundwater, with JART, with the Ministry of Natural Resources, making sure that the buffer that we've got between the quarry and the wetland is sufficient to protect the surface water and all the ecological functions.
Okay. And I guess one last question. I guess should you start, when you start, you are going to start quarrying on the southern portion, southeast? Is that
Yes.
fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, I guess identified as contaminated land is the speedway. Will you remediate the speedway land prior to any quarrying,
Correct.
correct? Okay.
Right?
That's
Well,
all from
before you go into that area.
Before we go into
Yes.
that area, it will be
Yes.
be cleaned up, yes.
Okay. You wouldn't remediate it prior to doing any quarrying anywhere?
No.
It would require stripping the land, and the intention is not to strip any more land than's necessary at the front end.
Okay.
There has been testing done on it,
And?
and there's additional site remediation and site testing that is required to
Required.
confirm the extent.
So you wouldn't be worried about any runoff happening into any part that you extract from prior to remediating that land?
Runoff into the quarry,
Into the quarry, runoff into it?
and any water that gets into the quarry and has to be pumped out of the quarry, all has to be tested and is required to have a Ministry of Environment certification of water quality.
Okay, that's all for now.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Councillor Wagner?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I don't have any questions right now. There's going to be a number of delegates that that will speak on certain things and that we have written. At the end, I imagine we'll get another chance to ask questions if we don't feel that something has been covered by somebody. Thank you.
Councillor Hoyle?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. My question is, we talked about the racetrack, and Councilor Elliott mentioned about cleaning up the area and all that. My issue is that, well, I guess an issue could be that you're going to reset or change the drain, and the way it looks like on here, it's going to go into that area. So the runoff, am I not right? No? Because the runoff would still be coming from the racetrack, from those lands into the ditches, if it's not mediated. So how do we, I just think before the process even starts that area should be cleaned up. That's just my opinion.
There won't be any change of drainage from the speedway
But isn't
from what it
that,
is today.
but that drain goes by it, doesn't it?
No, the Wigno drain is to the east of it.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? Any other questions from council? Okay. There are 12 delegates registered to speak on item 4.1. The delegates that are here in person, I will call each of you up to the podium by name. Anyone participating online will be admitted into the meeting once your name is called. You will be permitted 10 minutes to speak. First delegate, Mr. Robert Henderson. Please state your name and address, please.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I just have a few statements to make before we open the meeting to the public. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Schultz.
That's okay. We got a little off track here.
I'm a rookie at this.
If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments are passed by council, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City of Port Colborne Council to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And further, if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submission to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments are passed by council, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. To any interested members of the public, if you'd like to receive future notices regarding this application, please contact me by email at david.schultz@portcolborne.ca or by phone at 905-835-2900, extension 202. Or you can also contact the acting clerk at clerk@portcolborne.ca. To any members of the public in attendance in council chambers, there's a sign-in sheet at the back of the room on the podium over there where you can sign your name and you'll receive any future notices regarding this application. At this time, your mayor, deputy mayor, if I'd like to invite you to bring any members of the public up who wish to speak.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Schultz. We'll bring up the 12 delegates now, starting with Mr. Henderson. Each speaker will have 10 minutes.
Good evening. In 1936, Dale Carnegie published a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. In the next few minutes, I intend to influence your decision by applying one of those principles. The principle is, try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. In trying to put myself in your position, I recognize that you have democratically been elected and given the power to make this decision. I have often said you can make good decisions if you have good information. What I want to share is information that I've acquired and perspective and interpretation of that information. First and foremost, I want to talk of the financial opportunity. For the past 150 years or so, it has been farming done on the proposed Pit 3 extension. If rezoned, the tax base will increase for the 45-year life of the quarry. Based on the IBI group estimate, the city will gain $9,120 from the quarry, lose $4,830 from devaluation of properties within 1 kilometer of the new boundaries, and that represents a net gain of $4,290 per year. As IBI group pointed out, this equates to $1.03 million over the 45-year life of the extension. Now let's go the other direction. And if the quarry operates 5 days a week and for 50 weeks a year, it increased to increased revenue of $17.16 per day. But what happens after the quarry life is finished, say 100 years from now? If you don't rezone, there is still a tax base. Farmland and residential taxes are set by the municipality. Mineral aggregate operation and industrial tax is set by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, also known as MPAC. I'm told that the quarry tells MPAC what they do, then MPAC assigns a class and assesses a value to the property. That establishes what the city and the region can charge. In this process, you give away your power. What if in 50 years, when all the aggregate is gone and the property is becoming a passive lake, the owner decides it's a liability and abandons it? MPAC can classify it as exempt. If that happens, the tax revenue goes to zero. Also, when the aggregate stops flowing, so does the fee from the Ontario Aggregate Resource Corporation. That fee is intended to offset higher road maintenance costs due to increased truck traffic within the city. So I ask you, so don't surrender your power. My second point is that you can predict how people will act in the future based on what they have done in the past. It is used all the time when interviewing for jobs. I believe it also applies to the management of a company. In 1982, the council of the day negotiated that Pit 1 would be rehabilitated similar to Pit 2, which, by permit, would become a passive recreational lake. I must say, on the one hand, I was heartened when Port Colborne Quarries withdrew their request for a site alteration permit and said that they would not pursue the plan to backfill Pit 1 with excess construction material. On the other hand, I was disheartened when a different Port Colborne Quarry manager immediately said, "Not at this time." When Rankin Construction bought Port Colborne Quarry in 2007, it came with the 4444 permit. That permit states that Pit 2 and Pit 3 were to have the walls of the quarry progressively rehabilitated as material was mined. This was not done by previous owners and, until recently, has not been done by Port Colborne Quarries. Ontario Stone, Sand and Gravel Association in their brochures make reference to the practice of progressive rehabilitation. It is likely a requirement of every permit that is issued by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. Yet, Port Colborne Quarries has not followed a practice that is required by permit and highlighted by an association of which they are a member. I am concerned Port Colborne Quarries will act in their financial best interest and not the interest of humanity. I want to see the water of the Onondaga Aquifer continue to flow as it has for eons of time. The permit that Port Colborne Quarries is seeking is a risk to that flow. It is not just my opinion, but that of hydrogeologists from Ecometrics. In their report, they wrote the following, quote, "The Onondaga Aquifer, which is the main aquifer in the area, is in the similar limestone unit from which Port Colborne Quarries produce crushed aggregate. The aquifer is a karstic limestone unit, which is the source of drinking water supply for the majority of local residents in the area. The karst represents holes, cavities, and channels that formed in the rock over geologic time as a result of groundwater flowing through and dissolving the rock. The high permeability associated with karstic limestone enables fast flow of water into and through the subsurface, and rapid flow can occur over long distances that can be through uncertain pathways. In general, karstic aquifers are susceptible to groundwater contamination. In such aquifers, contamination can spread rapidly and can endanger down-gradient water supply wells." End of quote. That is the opinion of an expert. I recently attended a court of revision to do with the Drainage Act. The representative from Port Colborne Quarries made it clear that they hire experts to represent them. This is actually a good thing. However, there are some things for which we do not need an expert. One of them is the need for clean water.
Mr. Henderson, you have one more minute, please?
Okay, if you need proof, try living without it for a week. You will become so dehydrated you may experience headache, dizziness, and fatigue. After all, the human body is about 60% water, our brain is about 73% water, and blood is about 80% water. For quite a while, I thought the solution was to stipulate that the license for the extension be a Class A, which means the quarry is above the water table. I was in favor of such a license. However, I changed my opinion when I found out that the municipality is responsible for rezoning an area, and then it's the NRF who issues a permit for the volume based on that zoning. In this process, the city relinquishes control of the municipal level and gives it to the MNRF at the provincial level. Furthermore, if a Class A permit is issued and later an applicant for a Class B permit is requested, the municipality is powerless to make stipulations. Class B allows quarrying below the water table. So don't surrender your power. I'll skip my third point, was just to do with the protest, and conclude with, I have outlined 2 reasons to maintain the zoning as it is. You don't need 2 reasons, you only need 1. Is it the disappearance of a tax base for future generations? Is it humanity's need for clean water and to not risk contamination of the source? Maintain your power, preserve the zoning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henderson. Next, we'll hear from Sharon Ladd. And escort. Okay, no problem.
And have lived at 1266 Weaver Road, Port Colborne, approximately 40 years now. I own 850-foot frontage directly across from this quarry expansion proposal. I strongly oppose that they want to change the agricultural zoning to mineral aggregate operation to reduce the minimum setback from 90 meters to 30 meters and to be able to quarry under a precious water table. I have a 30-acre horse farm. My Windstrong Morgans live off our land with pasture and precious well water. And I have a kennel license for my kennel operation, Positively Pampered Pet Grooming Boarding at Port Colborne Portuguese Water Dog Kennels. These businesses are our livelihood. And we enjoy our work and appreciate our water well, our drinking source, and all the water needed for our businesses. Reading the objections that I've included from the Niagara Water Protection Group, from my neighbors that have lived or bought around the quarry in the past till now, it is very worrisome what they've been through. As the closer they get, the more damage we get. The history proves they don't care or want to remediate back to nature the depleted quarries. I agree the neighbors have many ideas how to fix their problem, but I cannot exist here safely with it happening here, and I don't want to live in those conditions. I bought my agricultural property for the privacy, drinking well water, and I have met all the strict zoning conditions to run my kennel for my dogs and build a barn for my horses. I got all my permits for the barn, the driveway, the sign to run my agritourism business horse trails here also. My neighbors, they do the farmers market, so I had the horse trail rides and they'd had the market. It works out good for the area and agritourism. The proposal will negatively affect all my expansion plans now that my husband is working with me and for the horse trails and stuff. Having the quarry entrance directly in front of my horse pasture and designated training area is also an objection of mine. My lawyer, Margaret Hoy, wants me to read the letter she wrote for me. Loud objections, dear sirs, loud objections to quarry proposal. The basis of the objection is multifold issues as follows: nuisance, environmental damage, property damage, environmental, destruction of endangered species, pollution of the water table, disturbance of surface pollution by disturbing contaminated property, traffic disruption. They want to put it, the entrance, right in front of my place. And they want to come closer. Like, seriously? Blasting, destruction of property, contamination of surface and groundwater, and destruction of quiet enjoyment of my property. Nuisance. The proposal directly and negatively impacts on the property and enjoyment of my by reason of noise, traffic sounds, blasting of the quarry, sounds, truck noise, and exhaust fumes, and pollution, and possibly rotting garbage smells, all of which will be contrary to acceptable level for livestock, farming, and enjoyment of the land, and the health of animals and humans. There is no remedy to any of this in the proposal. Further, the above-mentioned factors will result in further devaluation of the land and property surrounding the quarry. Most of my neighbors have their places up for sale since COVID, and they're not selling. They're not selling. Who wants to buy a property with that big sign up there saying what you plan on doing at the quarry, eh? Environmental damage. The site for the quarry is on contaminated land, which includes pollutants from the mining or smelting at Inco, now Val, in the area. The land has been deemed contaminated from this and it contains multiple toxic chemicals, some of which are carcinogenic in nature. The disturbance of these dangerous and toxic chemicals by this quarry proposal will further contaminate through these chemicals throughout the region, creating further harm to the surrounding lands, wildlife, and people, and the ability to live safely in the area. In addition to the proposal being a conveyor belt for further distribution of the contaminants from disturbing and the contaminated property pollution, the proposal will endanger wildlife in the area by removing habitat, by blasting, clearing, noise from the machinery, trucks, and blasting, such that wildlife cannot coexist in the area, given the use of this property. Endangered and threatened species inhabit the area, such as Fowler's toad, bluebirds, whippoorwill, evening grosbeak, barn swallow, barn owls, painted turtles, salamanders. I know there's more. Physical damage. In addition to the above concerns, I have already sustained damage from blasting, including numerous broken windows in my house, as well as cracks in my basement. I've attached photographs of all the blasting this is an unacceptable result of the quarry currently blasting, and further proposals on this property are unacceptable and will no doubt cause further physical damage and destruction to my property, my house. Water table pollution. The water table is at high levels in this area, and this proposal will pollute the water table, which is a source of water for both human and animal consumption, as well as industry. Once polluted, there is no process to clean, to correct this huge water table, which develops from Lake Superior down to this area. This harm is immeasurable and irreparable by either process or money. In summary, I am objecting to the proposal for all the reasons set forth above and supports the other objections provided. This proposal is harmful to both myself, my property, my well-being, my livestock, the environment, the wildlife in the area, and the water table, which provides substantial amounts of clean drinking water, not only for myself, but lots of Ontarians. Oh. I just got to show you a picture. I do have horses. This picture shows, okay, now I'll take a look at it. This is over at Humberstone right now. This was after a jet car blew up couple cars chained behind it. And this big plume of smoke I call it a grandstand gesture of total disrespect for agricultural land. I watched in horror as this massive plume floated over their hayfield, it's agriculture, that the neighbor's farm, towards my horse's pasture, and I could not do anything to stop it from dispersing all over the land, all over agricultural land. That's what they're doing now, and they haven't even got their proposal yet. So they don't care, and they've already known of all my damage done to my property, and they don't care. They haven't offered to fix anything. And I know the land's contaminated.
Mrs. Gladden, one more minute, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
The what?
You said one more minute.
Oh, okay, that's, okay. Yeah, so I'm just, yeah. Yes, my husband would like to talk. He's been here, living there for 25 years. So when he moved in and first saw the black snow, that was something he had to deal with, that we couldn't do anything about because of the contamination. That we are over the MOE guidelines. There's no way we can be over the MOE guidelines when we're directly across the road and they're saying they're not contaminated. There's no way. There you go. Go ahead, dear.
Okay, Emma.
Thank you. You're Kevin?
Yes.
I do have you listed as a separate delegate.
That's fine, yep.
Okay. Do you want to, okay,
You can,
Now, but you have 10 minutes now.
okay, go
Kevin
ahead.
has 10 minutes. Kevin has 10 minutes now.
I'm getting out of the way.
Ladies first.
Okay, my name is Kevin Ladd. I own 1284 Weaver Road, which is directly across the corner from where Rankin wants to do their main entrance. I come from a trucking background. I started in the industry 1973 as a child. So I know about trucks, I know all about that. I was in the industry for a long time. At a previous meeting we had a couple years ago now, the voice of the quarry told us that they figured on 500 trucks a day. Well, that means 500 to them means 1,000 to me, because 500 in means 500 out. And I don't feel I should have to be exposed to that at this time of my life when I'm able now to be home and work on my lands and such. And I've got some concerns about their runoff. They only expropriated. My property was expropriated a number of years ago, long before I bought it, for the runoff for the either a left turn lane or a runaround. I could run off for Weaver Road. They only have 250 feet there of expropriated land. You back up a couple trucks there, 2-3 trucks, you're already into the live lane of Highway 3. So I don't know where they're going to park all these trucks in the morning that you watch pile up at the quarry at their other entrance. They have quite a extensive long driveway there. They can pile up, 10, 15 trucks. Everyone likes to get their load on first thing in the morning, get to the job site by 7. Trucks pile up in the morning waiting for their loads. Guys come early because they got to be at another job an hour away. I'm concerned about the dust, trucks slowing down, Jake brakes, brake dust. I don't want to breathe 500 trucks. Brake dust slowing down, listen to the Jake brakes. I don't want to listen to that. Then they got to turn left. Then I got to wait for them, I got to listen to them now, start up again, turn left into the quarry, and I think the quarry will agree. Most of their traffic is coming from the 140 down to the quarry, to the entrance, and then same thing going back out. 500 trucks pulling away with their heavy loads, spewing their exhaust fumes all out as they're hauling their heavy laden trailers out. I don't feel I have to breathe that. Okay, that's enough about the trucks coming and going. They finally admitted tonight that the site's contaminated. It was contaminated historically through other business or industries in town. It's a historic thing. Everyone knows about it. 20 years ago, they let the cat out of the bag here in this building. and said, hey, we contaminated the area. If you think that that site is not contaminated, you're wrong, because it is. It's heavily contaminated. Heavy metals from the big stack that they knocked down in the 90s, the 500-foot stack, and it's only a couple kilometers as the crow flies to where this location is. Now, they also, the previous owner of the racetrack, bought in, we had to listen to tailgates all summer long slapping, and it's a good 3/4 of a mile away, and believe me, they can be quite penetrating when you got to listen to it all day long. They brought in toxic, contaminated materials from another part of the region. They didn't want it. They brought to the quarry that big mound behind to the north of the grandstand, which the quarry calls the sound berm, is a hill of toxic waste that the last owner brought in. It was his property. He was going to do what he wanted, and that's what he did. And we got to live with it. These guys want to come in now. Of course, they want to strip all the what they refer to as overburden off the soil, off the rock, because that's their money, is the rock. All this overburden. What are they going to do with it? They're going to pile it closer to my house. My house is only about 200, just a little over 200 feet from this corner where I have to live. And they want to pile all this contaminated earth up all around their boundary so they can get to that precious rock. I'm not in for it. I'm not in. I don't want it. You know, I don't want to live like that with all this contaminated material piled up even closer to my house now. Okay, we talked about the site. Maybe you should bring their sign, their own sign they had up on Highway 3 back up on the screen. Could you do that for me?
Mr. Schultz has that, I think.
Yeah, the sign, what shows like the green patch of land that they want to expand on, Pit 3. Anyways, I can, you guys can, whatever. They don't even have Weaver Road on the sign. It's like we don't even exist.
It's as if we don't even exist.
Yeah,
and they say everyone's crop farmers and we're livestock
we're not even
farmers.
on the sign. The Weaver Road is just a line you don't know what to the.
It's like we've disappeared.
Yeah, like we don't exist. We told them in a meeting a couple of years ago we had a problem with windows breaking, walls cracking, cement floor, basement cracking. We got
fireplace.
Yeah, we got laughed at and told they're getting closer.
Yeah, they giggled.
At a public meeting, so it's not like this
Sharon, when I phoned to complain.
So, okay, yeah, water I'm concerned about. I have a well. I drink from this well. It's maybe 25 feet deep. They dig a big pit right on the other side of my highway, on the side of the highway there. Where's my water going to go? It's not going to take a hydrologist long to figure that one out. It's going to go down in their pit. My precious water will be pumped out in my ditch in front of my house, and I won't have anything to drink. Water.
Neither will the animals.
This setback, too, that 30, 90 meters, all this stuff, I had to adhere to larger setbacks to possess a few animals of husbandry. To have a goat and a chicken.
151 meters for
Yeah.
dog kennel.
Dog kennel, you had to adhere to all these much larger setbacks.
We
where,
just can't get up and move
Yeah.
our dog kennel and horses.
yeah, like the setback, where they're getting these distances from, they got two sets of rules because I had to adhere to much further setbacks with just having livestock and animals and dogs. Racetrack. Oh yeah, just so the people that don't know, Tom Rankin owns Port Colborne Quarries. He owns Rankin Construction. He bought the farmer's field beside us, which is the agricultural land, and he bought the racetrack. Now, ever since it seems Tom Rankin's bought this racetrack, all we've had is a circus sideshow, more or less.
One more minute, Kevin, okay?
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. We had their blowing up a couple cars on a chain with a jet car. We had that. We had a haunted house out there for weeks with a record playing and women screaming and it sounded like a bunch of hillbillies on the record laughing and stuff. We had to listen to that. It'd be dark, 11 o'clock at night, and this record would still be playing over there. You'd have to listen. Yeah, it was a haunted racetrack or something they
If
did.
we could just stick with the planning application.
Well, I'm just letting you know
That is in the planning application.
what we've had to put
Racetrack.
up with from this new owner. Anyways, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Next I'll call up Mr. Gary Gamerluck. Hi Gary, you've been here once or twice, you know the routine, I guess, eh?
I know the routine.
Perfect, thank you.
Deputy Mayor, council members, city staff, concerned citizens, PCQ representatives. My comments are specific to the expansion of Pit 3 into the lands known as the new Humberstone Speedway, and I remain committed to my previous comments and submissions regarding the Speedway lands dated April 6, 2021. To date, I believe that we, the public, have not seen a robust process control plan from Port Colborne Quarries, Inc., a control plan that concisely and clearly documents the step-by-step process or processes that will be used to address the years of contamination on this property. This document must include risk assessment documentation. The risk assessment will clearly identify all process-related risks associated with the remediation and cleanup of all the above and below ground contamination, including contingency plans related to those risks. Some of the materials or contaminants that are on that property, or since the Speedway started in 1958, were gasoline, engine oil, automatic transmission fluids, gear oil, ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze, including materials that were imported and deposited on the site, and calcium chloride, which was used to make the track more compactable and keep dust down. To date, Port Colborne Quarries has not provided a realistic date or a timeline as to when they would be starting the remediation process of the lands known as the New Humberstone Speedway. The concern here is that the inspection and testing results have been completed, and we believe that by the time the encroachment or the expansion of Pit 3 even comes close to the Speedway lines, a very significant amount of time will have taken place, thus making those results outdated. Over time, it is reasonable to expect that those contaminants identified, and some possibly not identified during the studies, could or will have already migrated to other areas of the Speedway property and adjacent lands. Therefore, as the Pit 3 expansion process proceeds, undetected pockets of contaminants could be disrupted, exposing them to atmosphere. This disruption will also put above and below ground water at risk. Additional testing, in my opinion, would be required. It is for this reason I respectfully request that council require as a condition of approval that a process control plan and a realistic timeline specific to the Speedway lands be provided. I would like to point out that on April 6, 2021, I objected to the initial PCQ proposal, which was to build berms from the material at the Speedway site. Eventually, when mining of the site was completed, they would use the material from the berms for sloping the sides of Pit 3 to create a passive lake, which would be into the exposed aquifer, as the drawdown of the groundwater table will already extend into contaminated part of the site, reinforcing the fact that Humberstone Speedway lands be completely remediated well before quarrying encroachment upon those lands. It is important to note that shortly after my objections were heard, Port Colborne Quarries retained WSP engineering consultants to conduct the Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental site assessments. Posted on the WSP website, there is an article entitled How to Manage Soil from Brownfields under Ontario Regulation 406-19. It describes in detail the services and processes WSP uses. To quote from the article, our experts understand Ontario's Regulation 406-19, how it can affect the feasibility of your project as well as opportunities. To further quote from the document under the item, learn the history of your excess soil, referencing sub-item checkpoint. Do you need to study groundwater flows to see where those impacts might be migrating to or from? Question: why are the recommendations in this article not recommended for the new Humberstone Speedway lands? This article was written August 28, 2020, authored by Carl Schroeder and Brian Whiffen of WSP. Finally, regarding the realignment of the Port Colborne drain, which is the Wigmill and Michener, since the realignment of the drain and drains is required to accommodate Port Colborne Quarries Inc. Pit 3 plans, expansion plans, I feel that it only be fair that Port Colborne Quarry bear all the costs associated with the realignment and be responsible for continued maintenance. This should not be the responsibility or shared costs of adjacent property owners, the City of Port Colborne, or the regional municipality of Niagara. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Next, I have a virtual delegation, Gail Babian, Madam Clerk.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Gail.
Okay. I really don't have a lot of comment except to say that Port Colborne Quarries under Reagan Construction has been a good corporate citizen, providing much needed employment, revenue, and economic stability for the City of Port Colborne. I've lived across from the quarry since 1954, the year the quarry began, and my family has not experienced any adverse effects during this whole time. In fact, in the 70s, the quarry allowed my father to draw water for our cattle when our well at the barn went dry. As far as the nickel contamination goes, the Furman and Babian families have cultivated fields adjacent to the quarry for years. My father and myself grow hay and pasture cattle on our farm with no ill effects. So in my opinion, that's not a valid complaint. I hope that council approves this application for zoning bylaw amendment and official plan to allow the Pit 3 expansion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. Next delegate, Cindy Mitchell on behalf of Joseph Van Reuven. Cindy? Mitchell. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, I can, Cindy. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay. And I understand that I have a turn to speak after I'm my own self. Is that correct?
Yes, you do. Right now you're on behalf of Joseph Van Reuven.
Okay. Joseph has shared with me materials that he has already sent in to the city and various things. Joseph outlines that his family has been living at I can't find his address. Anyways, Joseph has been living across from PCQ along Highway number 3 since the late 1990s. And he has a few concerns. One of his main concerns is the migration and spawning of northern pike. And he's speaking about past behaviors of the expansion of the quarry. He says that the Wignall drain flows across his property and will continue to flow across his property with the expansion. Yes. And when they were doing the original part, Pit 3, he had taken photos of an intermittent marshy field there, in which was a spawning bed for northern pike. Joseph and his neighbors had paid attention that the adult fish went up the Wigmill drain from Lake Erie across his property, ended up in the field where pit 3 now is, where they would spawn, and then they would return to the lake down the Wigmill drain. So they would watch these fish go back and forth. When pit 3 was installed, because he's speaking about past behaviors, he said that no measures were taken by PCQ or the MNR back then to protect the pipe or the spawning area before the pit 3 quarry was dug. So Joseph is concerned about the repetition of behaviors of not having proper studies and looking into the fish and the spawning. He says that the fish are now more rarely seen, but they still exist within the Wigmill drain. There's another part that comes later that ties into the health of the fish and stuff. He said several years ago that they had supported their younger son's interest in growing organically grown vegetables, salad greens on their property, and then selling them at the Port Colborne market. They used for irrigation of these greens water from the Wigmill drain. But by midsummer, customers began to complain about the chalky deposits on his fresh produce. They determined that the chalky sediment originated from the irrigation water taken from the Wigmill drain, which the source was at that time to dispose of wastewater from the aggregate processing. So basically it went into that one pond from the crushers and all that, washed and went into that one pond and pumped out into the Wigmill drain. So Joseph is concerned about the sediment that continues within the drain, which harmed his son's business and caused concern about people buying the product. So then Joseph is also concerned that the sediment that flows down the Wigmill drain ends up on the floor of Lake Erie, which locals down at the end of the Wigmill drain where it enters Lake Erie often experience the substantial growth of what's called pigweed down there. I don't know the proper name of it, but anyways, the pigweed grows, it dies, it stinks, it impacts the fish, and he feels that nobody has looked into the long-term harms of that, plus the water that flows from quarry water into the drain that comes from the aquifer is actually colder than the lake at times, how that impacts. Joseph is also concerned about his home water. They have a water treatment system, which is a 5-micron sediment filter, and it often becomes clouded with black deposits when the quarry is in operation and blasting happens and throughout the whole thing. So it's an expensive process to clean his water, and the clogging continues all the time. He said last summer on 2 occasions when he was pumping untreated water for his garden that wasn't going through the processor, when a blast would happen, he would have a period of time when the water would flow black out of his garden hose. And he said that there's other effects on his property from blasting in his barn, his garage, his basement floors. They have a Century home, which is a solid home. And the brickwork on his home, he believes, is due to blasting. Joseph and I had discussed that. An engineer sets up the blasting and how things should be blasted, but the actual blaster person basically only needs a high school education. They're not even they don't even have a professional license. So the guy that blasts every day after he's been told by an engineer doesn't have a license. Your hairdresser requires a license and a professional training and all that. But anyways, we're kind of surprised by that, but that's not the city of Port Colborne's problem. That's the industry problem. Joseph is also very concerned about the 90 meter setback being reduced to 30 meters because it will only increase damage to homes and higher risks for traffic and dust and all of that, and leaves no room for expanding or widening the highway either. Like, they're not going to widen it towards a drop-off pit. They're going to, if they ever do widen it in the future, it's going to end up taking people's front lawns away. Joseph said that he had worked in an iron ore mining town where blasting occurred 7 times a day, and he worked as a seismologist for energy mines and resources for 2 years. He's familiar with blasting, and he said, while it may be difficult to prove the correlation between damage in his home, he said that you can't to deny there's a connection, which neighbors have been saying. They've got no feedback from Port Colborne Quarries, no sense of responsibility for, the blasting being out of control or blasting causing harm. He feels it's naive that this is not acknowledged. Joseph discusses that the sequence of pits 1, 2, and 3 extend from approximately 1 kilometer west of his home and 1 kilometer east of his home, and will be even further when the extension is built. So we're talking about like miles and kilometers of pit after pit after pit, a big trench.
Cindy, you have, if I can interrupt you for a minute, you have 2 more minutes, please.
Okay, so Joseph says collectively these 3 pits have the effect of drawing down water northward toward the deeper wells, which are these quarries away from the well. He says the proposed expansion could potentially result in threatening his water supply and that of others. And this is a significant concern for him because when you pump from a pit with a permit to take water, to keep the pits dry, and all 3 pits dry, you're pumping a substantial amount of water, which keeps drawing water in and drawing water away from wells and dropping the level of wells and changing the quality of the water. That's a big concern for him in the future. So that's concluding Joseph's concerns.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. We'll come back to you at a later time for your personal presentation, okay?
Okay.
Now we'll call on Harry Walls. Evening, Harry.
Good evening, Mark, council, staff, gallery, both present and on the boob tube. What I would like to do tonight is just to give you a little bit of supporting information with regards to the documentation that I have sent in, which has been fairly extensive. There's a lot of documentation there, much more than I could even try to go through in 10 minutes. So I'm going to go fairly quickly tonight. And this presentation is only to highlight some of the items that I've expressed concerns about in the submissions that I've given. Next. There's no question that land has been productive agricultural land in the beginning. And even today there are portions of that land that are agriculturally producing products. So there is no question that it is agricultural land. And in the past that was used for the production of food, mainly agricultural products as food, and that has not changed. We still need food. Now, despite our diets and everything else, we do need food to eat. So that is still a need. And this is one reason why the mineral aggregate mining is to be considered a temporary use according to the Aggregate Resources Act. And I mean temporary. It's supposed to be rehabilitated, and when in real viable possibly is to be rehabilitated back to an agricultural purpose. Next, please. There's no question about it that in 1982, after 2 years of long negotiations between the city and the owner at that time of the quarries, that there was supposed to be rehabilitation of pits 1, 2, and 3. That's a definite agreement that was in place, and it still is in place today. The only problem with that is it's not being enforced by the city, and it's not being honored by the owner of the quarry at this point in time. And to that fact, it's fairly disturbing and frustrating that we're here trying to get the agreement from a public side enforced. But that agreement does exist. Next, please. I'm sure that back in 1982, this is what we were expecting. If we weren't expecting that, we wouldn't have agreed to that agreement, especially after 2 years. And that's what we were hoping to get. Next, please. And then in 2010, along came the proposal for the hotel. And that hotel is on part of the aggregate mineral lands. They approached the city with some, Rankin approached the, PCQ approached the city with the idea of building a hotel with a prestigious industrial complex. Again, this, if you go to the next slide, please. This is where it was proposed, a nice wood lot size, but I'm sure that if you go past there today, you'll change your mind on that. But that's not there. If we look at this all from a perspective of a timeline, if you go to the next one, Sammy, please. In 1982 was the site plan agreement for a passive recreational lakes for Pit 1, Pit 2, and Pit 3. It was removed from the license of Pit 2 and 3 by the request of PCQ to the MNR for Pit 1, under the guise that it was a city agreement, not an MNR agreement. With this timeline perspective, it provides clues to the intention of PCQ with regards to the rehabilitation of the pits and future uses of the subject properties after the pits are depleted. So you can see in 2014, no more recreational lake. Now it's industrial use. In 2016, not just for concrete manufacturing, we want it for anything we want to do within the classification of heavy industrial. 2018, the application then came in for a site permit for alteration for the landfilling of excess fill in Pit 1. No intention of rehabilitating that. And we heard that tonight, that Pit 1, there is no intention of rehabilitating that to a passive lake. Next slide, please. So where do we stand today? No recreational lake. Next slide, please. No hotel. And that hotel would have been very beneficial economically for the valet center, for sporting events, for tourism that would be coming here. So I question where the economic viability and prosperity of this proposal is. Next slide, please. Now PCQ wants to amend the zoning from agricultural to mineral aggregates. They want to mine in the aquifer. They want to reduce the setbacks from 90 to 30 meters. They claim they will rehabilitate quarries, and they claim they will provide economic prosperity for 22 jobs. Next one, please. A quick and easy, a concern to me was in their application to the region, there is a section of that application, Part 5C, that asks the question if there was ever any fill placed on the subject properties. Their response to that question was no. And as a response of no, they were not required to submit an assessment, an environmental assessment for that property. Well, in fact, if you look at this picture here, that highlights where industrial landfill material was placed in there from the pulp and paper industry. It's there and it exists today. And that is, so that application to the region is not complete or accurate. Next slide, please. And that material should be addressed now, not later. I ask you, pull out your crystal balls so that you can predict the future for us. They did that back in 1982, and let's do that now. Consideration must include possible change of ownership of the subject lands, and decision must be consistent with PPS. And to ensure that the decision resulting conditions for the amendments that you might want to grant PCQ, they are transferable to any new owners. There's no reason why that property can not be sold to another owner. It has been done in the past, it can be done in the future, and it may be done in the future. If that's the case, that future owner has to accept the responsibility, just like PCQ should have accepted the responsibility for the 1982 agreement. So, any decisions you make must include that ability to transfer that land to a new owner, which may not be as amendable as PCQ, which may have other intentions that are not being considered, that will be more harmful to our area. So we need to make sure that the perceived future is the actual future, not a dream. Next slide, please. And we've heard about learning from the past, and there are some great and intelligent and respectful people that have experienced the need to make decisions based on history and past performances and behavior. Winston Churchill, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We're here again. 1982, we're there. Now we're here again. In German philosopher Gregor Hegel, he said, the only thing that we learn from history is that we learn nothing from it. Well, we can change that. Stephen Hawking, we spend a great deal of time studying history, which, let's face it, is mostly the history of stupidity. History is the truth. And the future is the truth of the history. So we need to watch that. The best predictor of future is past behavior, said Mark Twain. So
2 more minutes, Harry.
2 more minutes? I'm going to go real fast then. Next, please. The future. Past performance has predicted that there will be no rehabilitation of these pits into passive recreational lakes or anything compatible with residential development planned for the future. This is supported by continued efforts resisting the rehabilitation of the depleted pits and efforts to have them rezoned for heavy industrial land. This is enabled by the city and our planning by those who are elected and employed with the knowledge, authority, and responsibility to act out in our best interest. We will not learn from the past. Will we not learn from the past, or will we end up being here again, repeating this again and again, suffering from poor decisions? A quick one. Next slide, please. There's been discussions about the 90 meters. 90 meters doesn't give you enough time for enough room for development. Or 30 meters doesn't give you enough room at all. You can look at their drawings, which I have there. There's no sufficient room for a slow-down lane, plus extra lanes for passing or anything like that. And then in the future, as you heard before, there may be a potential. Next slide, please. Here's in view. The top picture is 90 meters. The bottom picture is 30 meters. You can see how squeezed in we're getting. Next slide, please. Again, this is from the next direction. Again, you can see we have a nice view coming in, nice scenery coming in for visitors and tourists coming into the city, but squeeze it in and you're going to set up a different visual impact totally. Next slide, please. What could be the future? And this is the important part. We have the knowledge and the ability to make the right decisions today to shape the future in the way we want it to be. We just need to use that knowledge and make it happen. Here are some proven ideas of what could be done that are economically prosperous. They conform to the PPS and they protect the aquifer and benefit the region and really make Port Colborne that little city in a big way. Next slide, please.
Harry, could you wrap up in 30 seconds because you're already at 10 minutes?
I am.
Thank you.
This exists in Shanghai. It's a quarry built. Next slide. This exists in Texas. Next slide. This exists in Port Colborne on in Westport Developments. Next slide. This exists out in BC, New Brunswick, and a number of areas where there's a floating communities which are established, and they could be established inside the quarry. Next one. This takes us back to agricultural. Aquaculture, which is next to agricultural, fish farming. That could be returned into a productive agricultural or a food placing. So in closing, if you will, please, next slide. Please implement conditions that must be met by the proponent. And in exchange for those amendments, being requested and enforce those conditions. Don't just put them out in paper and not do anything with them. Make the conditions that will allow accessing the resources on the temporary basis as intended by the Aggregate Mineral Resources Act and actually result in rehabilitation in the best interest of the region, the city, and our residents and visitors. Make the conditions so the aquifer is protected and the economic prosperity of the region and the city are positively influenced as required by the provincial policy statement. Make the conditions such that they will benefit the region and the city progressively while the quarrying and extend that out 60 years or further into the future as a minimum. This is the time to make the correct decisions and do what is right for all of our futures. Next slide, please.
Harry, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Ma'am,
Okay.
we can do it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. I didn't see the last slide. I should have waited another 5 seconds, eh? Next delegate is Jack Kalinga, please. Evening, Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, councilors, residents, and proponent. I live at 770 Highway 3. I share 400 meters of property line with Port Colborne Quarries, that's 1,400 feet, and I have done so since 1974. So I have a 49-year history with Port Colborne Quarries. I guess I'm an old-timer. And I go way back, way before Rankin Construction owned Port Colborne Quarries. It was CSL. The proponent missed the fact that after CSL was Ontario Stone Corporation, Cleveland, Ohio, and then Rankin. So it has had a number of owners since it was first started. I sent a rather detailed presentation, and most of the attachments in that presentation were taken directly from reports that 13 binders worth of studies. I went through most of them. And I looked at them carefully, and I've selected just a few, and I'll just let everyone that gets a copy of that look at the attachments on their own. But I'm going to go back. Some people are going to think some of my comments are not very aggressive, but I was involved in the expansion of Pit 2 in 1982. Started in 1980. In fact, 7 acres of that expansion, Port Colborne Quarries obtained from me. I got 4 acres to the east of my property because they owned within 50 feet of my house. So I had to do something. We exchanged property, and I managed an additional 200 feet east of my house. When that site, the application for license was presented, Port Colborne, even though somebody says there's no site plan agreement for Pit 1, there is a site plan agreement for the expansion of Pit 2, and clauses also refer that this compatible use of Pit 1 should be compatible to the requirement that Pit 2 become a passive recreation lake. The planner of the day, Glenn Barker, had in his recommendations that rehabilitation should occur within 6 months of depletion of the pit. So you saw an aerial view of all the pits, and I've sent you a copy from the report of that aerial. Does Pit 2 look like it is rehabilitated within 6 months of being depleted? And it was depleted in the late 1990s. So 25 years ago, that was essentially depleted. They now have found another, apparently, 1 million tons of stone in that pit, which they've removed over the last 2 years, but certainly not within 6 months. The planner for the region, in his recommendation to approve the rezoning back in 1982, was based on the fact that there were, in the 32 acres they wanted rezoned, it would only take 2 or 3 years to deplete that, and they needed that on an interim basis as they moved across into Pit 3. And what do we see now? That 3 to 5 years has gone on for over 40 years, and I've experienced it. What else have I experienced? I've experienced fly rock on my property. I had my roof redone, and the roofer asked what the divot was in my roof. And it occurred to me that that was one of the pieces that landed. That was 1987, if you'd like to look it up. The quarry sent 2 pickup trucks with 4 men onto my property to collect fly rock from my property. That's not hearsay. My wife has even witnessed them doing it. So, how does the city do anything to get the quarry to actually do what they've committed to? Well, once a license is granted, you don't have that opportunity. You have to ensure that your requirements get written into the license site plan, put on the license drawings so that the M&R can enforce them. And enforce them in a timely manner. I sent you a drawing of their staging. They had a staging drawing up here. That drawing shows 80 to 85% of the site in Phase 1A, and they're tying their wording of rehabilitation to sometime in Phase 1A. I would suggest that Phase 1A should be broken into at least, over 40 years, 8 different zones. Maybe five, so they got 8 years of each in those zones, and tie their rehabilitation and their progress, and they're moving the crushers to a much smaller area so that the M&R can enforce it as they progress, because right now the M&R can't enforce anything within a Phase 1A timeframe. Now I want to just go back to the realignment of the Wignall Drain. They talked a lot about the realignment that cuts across the east branch, but I didn't hear anything about the north realignment and the proposal to realign at the north end. The north end, currently, the Wignall Drain runs down Carroll Road, right through the middle of the wetland, along the south of the wetland, and cuts across at the south of Phase 3. They want to realign it around. They want to construct Phase 3. You saw the site plan and the outline in red of the phase of the Pit 3 extension. This is what it looks like. It is an east tab, it has a north tab, and then it has the remainder, the entire palm of my hand, as Phase 1A. And, well, a slice of Phase 1B and 2 right along the north at the south end of the wetlands. The report, the hydrogeotechnical, shows the overburden in that northeast corner as between 8 and 12 meters of overburden. the Falkirk unit rises from the southwest corner to the northeast corner, and the top of the Falkirk unit, or the bottom of the Falkirk unit, is, the last contour line is 169.5. You take the ground level at 182, subtract 12, and you're at 170. So you've got a wedge of rock, which is 2 meters at its maximum, tapering to nothing at the north end. There is no aggregate to remove. Why do they want to create a finger with a wetland isolated beside it?
Okay. 2 more minutes, Jack, please.
I would contend that there is no aggregate of value in that finger. They have to remove 100,000 cubic meters of overburden in order to get to 50,000 tons of aggregate. It doesn't make economic sense. The IBI report suggests that that finger is there as a corporate decision. That's the only reason they give. It's not financial. It is not economic. It is not the need for the aggregate. There's got to be another reason why they want to put a 10 to 12 meter deep excavation on the east side of a wetland when they are also applying for mining that depth, or 14 meters deep, south of the wetland, and they've already done it on the west side. So I have asked the PLC of JART for Port Colborne to ask what volume of aggregate there actually is. Those were my calculations, and I admit there's probably an up and down on that, but can they tell me how much aggregate they're actually going to get and how much overburden they're going to have to remove and how much they're doing that? If that is that finger, the city can refuse to rezone that finger. And that way, the Wignall Drain will not have to be relocated. It won't dry out the wetland. That embankment on the east side, creating a wetland peninsula, which I don't think there is a natural wetland peninsula in Ontario. So there's all kinds of reasons to reject the application for rezoning Phase 3, and the Wignall Drain will be perfectly safe, and all of the biodiversity in the wetlands will be preserved, and a lot of the effort being made to accommodate that excavation is being wasted. Thank you. Oh, I made a couple other points based on what came up during the topic. I've already said there is a site plan agreement from 1982. It's registered on title. There have been, already mentioned, 5 homes for sale within a kilometer of the proposed expansion within the last year. I have asked for, they're so open, I have asked for their seismic recordings from certain dates, and that was over a year ago. I have not received it. And my well was depleted when they moved south, east of my property, and when I put in a claim, I received $80. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack. Just to note that all the information that councilors get, we do read it. And even there's a few councilors and the mayor that's not here tonight, everything will be read and questions asked if there are any questions. So I just want to reassure you, this is not a waste of your time. We do read your stuff and try to figure it out sometimes, but we have lots of help. Okay, the next delegate is Janet Henderson. Hello, Janet, whenever you're ready, just go
Excellent. I'm
for it.
Janet Henderson. I live at 2199 Babyon Road, immediately north of the quarry. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and councillors, for allowing us to speak. The primary intent of this proposal is to delay the remediation of Pit 2, allowing Port Colborne Quarry to use the same strategy as they have in Pit 1 to absolve themselves of the responsibility to progressively rehabilitate Pit 2 in a timely manner. The intent of remediation is that it be done in a timely manner and to be progressive with the extraction of material. By proposing that Babyon Road be removed, delays the remediation of Pit 2 until the new Pit 3 extension to 2050, at which time the collective memory in the community will be diminished. Port Colborne Quarry's track record of not meeting remediation requirements is demonstrated by the lack of rehabilitation in Pit 2. Pit 2 should have been remediated based on the OSSGA best practice and the MNFR guidelines. In fact, Pit 2 is currently not in a state of remediation, and Port Colborne Quarries is therefore in violation of their current license. In 1982, there was a site plan agreement with the owners of Port Colborne Quarry at the time and the city of Port Colborne that both pits 1 and 2 were to be flooded. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Janet. I wasn't ready for a short one. David Henderson is our next speaker. Welcome, David. Start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, members of council, and members of the public. What I'm going to address tonight is very specific. It's about the desire of aggregate mining companies to get into the water table. There is no doubt in my mind that this province and country needs aggregate. We need it to survive. We need it to rehabilitate our roads, which are in bad repair, and many, many other things. But anyway, so that everybody here understands what will happen when we dig this large trench across the east side of Port Colborne. So PCQ is actually creating a trench in the Onondaga escarpment. So we're digging right down into the escarpment. It is a groundwater interceptor trench, and the area of influence continues to get larger and larger. Do you understand the impact? We are basically cutting a ditch across a waterway. We can't see it because it's underground, but that's what we're doing. There are no municipal water services in this area. The wells will need to be deepened. Cisterns will have to be replaced, and the need for constant monitoring and regular filling of cisterns. Anybody who buys water in this area knows the cost. It's not cheap. I'm very fortunate. I'm on city water and I live out there. The depleted quarries are unsightly. Normally the way that it's being presented, as they continue along the east side of the Port Colborne, they create a poor impression of the city. A passive lake or equivalent would be an improved vision of the entry to the city of Port Colborne, and would also lead to added tourism and potentially housing. Waterfront, even on a quarry, is valuable. Anybody that pays taxes that lives near waterway knows that. Look at the Westport development on this side of Port Colborne. So I want council to be aware that when you break into an aquifer and create this trench, you're completely disrupting the flow of water, and the consequences will be in our heads, except for the fact that once we get there, we'll all be dead. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Next up will be Melissa Bigford. Hi, Melissa. Start whenever you're ready.
Okay. To Mayor, members of council, and the gallery. Ontario's prime agricultural land is a finite, non-renewable resource comprising less than 5% of Ontario's land base. It is the foundation for food, the local economy. Agri-food exports, economic prosperity, and the growing bio-based economy. The provincial policy statement states that Ontario's primary agricultural areas shall be protected for long-term use for agriculture and defines primary agricultural areas as areas where primary agricultural lands predominate. Agriculture is a finite resource depending on soil, climate, and topography. This proposed expansion of Pit 3 should not be allowed as it does not follow the provincial policy for primary agricultural land, environmental conservation area, environmental protection area. When setting, designing, and operating permitted uses in primary agricultural areas, care must be taken to ensure the PPS environmental policies are met. For example, the environment is clean and healthy. Any undesirable effects of development, including impacts on air, water, and other resources, are minimized. Land, resources, and biodiversity are conserved, and the quality and quantity of water resources are protected, improved, and restored. The principal use in primary agricultural areas. Primary agricultural areas are protected for future generations. Land taken out of agricultural production, if any, is minimal. Regard is given to the long-term multi-generational impact on primary agricultural areas. Normal farm practices are able to continue unhindered. Agricultural and rural character and heritage are maintained as much as possible. Uses are compatible with agricultural uses. They make a positive contribution to the agriculture industry, either directly or indirectly. Servicing requirements, water and wastewater, road access, fire servicing policy fit with the agricultural context. Under these principles, an amendment to the official plan and zoning bylaw from agricultural to mineral aggregate should not be approved. How will the change in designation from agricultural to mineral aggregate follow the PPS environmental policies? What guarantees are there the removal of such a large parcel of primary agricultural land for the extraction of mineral aggregate will not result in environmental impact, specifically the fact that it will not be replaced to its original conditions as there is substantial quantity of mineral aggregate resources below the water table? What guarantees will be in place to protect the water table, our natural aquifer? How will a below water permit quarry follow the PPS environmental policies? It is not in the best interest of the protection of the environment and surrounding neighbors to alter the branch of the wiggle drain that currently extends into the wetlands and woodlands in the southern portion. You can't just move the natural wiggle drain and put it back close to where it was originally. It is stated that it will be restored to generally its original location, but no firm timeline is given. Will it be 60 years or never? What are the long-term environmental effects of this realignment, and who will be held accountable for any future damage this realignment could or will cause to the surrounding area? The minimum setbacks from a provincial highway should not be reduced from 90 to 30 meters. Setbacks are an established bylaw to protect the surrounding sensitive land uses within municipalities. The reduced setback will have adverse effects on the surrounding properties and could affect the long-term durability and structural foundation of Highway 3 and the abutting landowners. Why do we have a set of bylaws and rules in place to protect the surrounding properties and the environment if they are not enforced and can be altered to suit a developer? The applicant's report states all applicable permits and design approvals for a deceleration lane shall be secured from the Ministry of Transport prior to the construction and use of this access. However, in a previous report to Council by staff, it was stated that the subject site is within the MTO permit radius and ministry permits must be obtained prior to grading construction on site. The report also stated the Ministry of Transport will not allow access to Highway 3 from the subject site. So how will a new quarry entry-exit be established directly onto Highway 3 when the Ministry of Transport approval has not yet been acquired and the fact that it has been stated previously would not be approved, and within the smaller reduced setback of 30 meters? The hours of operation are stated in the report to be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., yet repeatedly in the traffic study report submitted by the applicant, it states that trucking activities begin at 6 a.m. Which one is it? Bearing in mind, staff shifts in the crusher machinery have started before the 7 a.m. noise bylaw and stated hours of operation. Why are so many different facts being presented by the applicant? These contradictions reported by the applicant's own study show a disregard for the rules and operational standards that are there to protect the surrounding neighborhood. My other major concern is the fact that the unlicensed Pit 1 will be used for the processing of the blasted rock from Pit 3, which includes the crushing, screening, washing, and storage of the blasted rock. There are no mitigation measures currently implemented at Pit 1 to protect the surrounding neighborhood. No protection from the increase in noise, dust, and continued contamination of the aquifer. There is also no guarantee and concrete timelines for when the processing equipment will be moved to Pit 3. Where does the accountability surrounding the continued use of Pit 1 fall under, as it is an unlicensed pit? How will we be protected from the exploitation of the current rules and bylaws? Why are the mitigation measures required for the processing of blasted rock in Pit 3 not being implemented and required in Pit 1 to help alleviate some of the ongoing environmental concerns mentioned above? Noise, dust, etc. In conclusion, this official plan and zoning bylaw amendment should not be approved, nor the minimum setbacks reduced. The applicant has not proved to be a good neighbor, operates with a disregard for the protection, consideration of the environment and neighborhood, and the current operational rules, standards, and bylaws. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. We'll go back to virtual Cindy Mitchell, if she's still there.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Cindy. Go ahead.
Okay, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare because I didn't know I'd have an opportunity to speak for myself because I was presenting Joseph's. Anyways, without repeating too much, I wanted to just touch base on the 90 meter and the 30 meter setback for highway number 3 and the exit and entrance spot on highway number 3. For myself, I think it's more rational to take it to Miller Road, where we already have a slowdown of traffic and stuff like that for agricultural machinery and all that, or even put the exit up where it's not really feasible up in that little finger up in the northeast corner, like maybe driving over the overburden instead of digging it all away just to get a tiny bit of what Jack was talking about, to get a tiny bit of aggregate. Maybe it could exit out onto second concession and then come down. Highway number 3 is busier and busier. I live out in Shirkston, and in the summertime, sometimes it takes me 5 minutes to pull out onto the highway. Some of the conversations out here, and I don't know if anybody considered this, we slow down when we're driving to Port Colborne. We slow down a gas line to 60 kilometers. We start to pick up speed to go into Port Colborne. If we have to slow down and be cautious for multiple trucks throughout the day on highway number 3, a lot of people out here are saying, I'm just going to go to Fort Erie to go shopping. Why would I go to Port Colborne? It's going to take forever to get there. There's going to be trucks all over the place. So that's another reason why not to do that on highway number 3. And you have out here for 5 months of the year, tens of thousands of people that drive and shop. So our businesses are gonna hurt. I have an overall question, like, why do we have processing in Pit 1 right now? Why do they say it's not licensed? It has nothing to do with it, but then PCQ, the applicant, includes it into all of their plans. So it is or it isn't. Everybody talked about past behaviors of Port Colborne quarries and not following, and that they're out of compliance with their license. That's true. I'd like to talk about agriculture. Part of it I want to say is that there is a group called the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, and they're hated by some and loved by others. But some of these examples presented tonight are telling us why we need to set a pause, a moratorium on all gravel mining licenses in Ontario until we can take a good study, a good look at what's happening. Let's look at our own little area, Port Colborne. We have one quarry already licensed, was formerly Cocoa Paving. I forget who bought it. They haven't even put shovels in the ground for years because they have no need to. Now we have what was formerly RE Law is expanding, and I think their ownership is Waterford, so they're going to be expanding. Port Colborne Quarries wants to expand, so we have potentially 3 pits on the Onondaga Aquifer happening in Port Colborne, or just outside of Port Colborne, a few miles into Wainfleet. Then we have another pit happening up in Niagara Falls called the Upper Quarry by Walker. So how much stone do we really need in Niagara? I know we're growing, but I mean, that's another reason for a moratorium, is to demonstrate need. They cry out, the industry cries out, oh, we need to be close to market, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we have 3 pits in Port Colborne traveling all over the Niagara region. My other comment is going back to agriculture, and a lot of people don't realize that, yeah, we have massive land here in Canada, but really only, and I'm quoting from a gentleman who's the president of the National Farmers Union, only 5% of Canada is farmland, that's viable farmland. Only 0.5%, that's like 0.5%, is a class of agricultural land that is really viable to grow almost any crop, and that's in southern Ontario, and a lot of that is in Niagara. Half of this land, I mean, a lot of this land is right here in Niagara and southern Ontario. At the rate we're going, and another reason for a moratorium is that we are paving over an average of 319 acres per day in Ontario, and aggregate mining, yes, we need it. It's a finite resource. We need to get it where it is, but we need to I mean, if you looked at the map of Ontario, we are full of holes in the ground, into our water table, abandoned pits, brand new pits popping up wherever. So we're looking at all this acreage. Let's go back to agriculture. We talk about money and jobs. Agriculture employs 67,400 people in Ontario, and it contributes $9.2 billion to the economy. And it's a renewable resource, agricultural. Aggregate mining is not. So again, the city was asked about the moratorium to support it. Other cities have, other regions have. I think this is a time we need to step back. I know the city won't do it because they can't afford any legal stuff, but it's a thought that we all need to keep in the back of our minds. What really scares me, and it came out in this meeting, is that Port Colborne Quarries doesn't plan to rehabilitate the Speedway grounds until they get to that area. It concerns me because they'll be blasting, they'll be disturbing. I think the city has it in its power to put in before zoning that that the Speedway grounds are completely rehabilitated before any work happens in that area, so that we're ensured that none of that pollution migrates into the water table. That's my biggest passion, is protecting the water for the future in the groundwater. A lot of people rely upon it. We know the lakes are at risk. If you look at a satellite picture of the blue-green algae that keeps popping up everywhere, which was a year or two ago, just in Buffalo, almost connecting with the Fort Erie pollution plant. I'm not making this up, it's real. So we need to be mindful, because there is enough water in the aquifer to provide for all of southern Niagara. So someone had said that Port Colborne Quarry is creating a trench along the Onondaga Escarpment. That's true. And our groundwater is interceptor trench. This area of influence is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what I'm talking about is the cone of influence under the ground, because in order to keep multiple pits, because their past behavior has not been rehabilitating, they have to keep pumping out water with permits to take water out of the bottom of the pits, and it keeps drawing up the groundwater and putting it at higher risk. And they throw it down the drain out to the lake. It impacts people's wells. It impacts the quality of the water. The karst cracks. If you think of karst, you've heard people use that term. It's massive cracks. and the water moves very quickly. So you set up a monitoring well. It could go so fast that a monitoring well wouldn't even pick up any pollution that might come from the speedway or wherever.
Cindy?
Kind of fast. Yeah.
If you please, 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Thank
The
you.
depleted quarries are unsightly. They're ugly. We have a chance to say, let's rehabilitate, let's rethink. Even Port Colborne Quarries in rank, and they're into building beautiful buildings and stuff like that. Like, if they turn it into passive lakes, who knows what the future could be for Port Colborne and for the business of Port Colborne Quarries, how they're expanding and that. We need to think outside the box and start protecting the water. Who owns the water? We should, the people. We can't put it at risk anymore. We've already had enough pollution in this city from Inco. Like, let's start a brand new page and start being forward thinking and active in protecting the environment, protecting the wetland that's there. There's no need for that drain to be going around the wetland when you don't need to mine that little finger up in the northeast corner. I don't know, the cost of homes, like there's the development that's going to happen between Kalali and Highway number 3, 1,600 homes. I forget the name of the company, but who's going to want to live there? Like, I think about teenagers driving, and there's only a truck pulling out on Highway 3, kids going to Lakeshore. It just terrifies me. When you dig up a quarry, I mean, like, there's a lot of talk about clean air and carbon and all that. When you dig up a quarry, you're not reducing the impact of carbon or anything. You completely remove the canopy for the future. So we need to set things prior to zoning, prior to licensing, that the MNR could enforce, that protects our environment and increases the potential of this city we have in the future. We just don't want holes in the grounds for another 60 years. I mean, like, here's an example of past behavior. Pit 2 is supposed to be depleted, and that was contingent upon getting the license for Pit 3. But what? All of a sudden, we're going for the expansion of Pit 3. But, oh my God, we got 1 million tons of dirt, stone left in there. We got to get that. So that delays the rehabilitation of Pit 2. Like, where else are we going to get some nice discoveries?
Cindy, can you wrap it up now, please?
Yeah, I want to thank you
you
for listening to me. I'm a bit angry. I'm nervous talking. I hope I made a little bit of sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Appreciate your input. Cindy was the last registered delegate. Is there anyone else in the audience from the public who would like to speak to item 4.1 at this time? Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just have one last passage to read here. If you wish to be notified of the approval of the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons and public bodies that give the clerk a written request for notice of the adoption and passing of an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. As I mentioned before, there is a sign-in sheet at the back of the room. If you've already provided comments or you've spoken orally at this meeting today, we will have your information, so you don't need to sign in again. But if you would like to sign in, please feel free to do so, and you'll receive notice of any decisions on this. Thank you. The proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment recommendation report will return to council at a future date. This concludes my portion of the public meeting. I'll now turn the meeting back to you, Deputy Mayor Bagu, to close the public portion of the meeting and receive the report for information.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. It's my first time doing one of these, so I do apologize to a lot of people. Does any councilor have any questions for Mr. Schultz? Councilor Bogner?
Not for Mr. Schultz, but general questions to be put in the record? Is that
Sure,
time
go
for
ahead.
that now?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
acceptable.
So there's some that didn't, nobody brought up that people would like to know. So I'm going to read some of those, and then I got a couple of my own. Is there justification from a municipal and regional perspective on how reducing the setback by 60 meters is protecting the established transportation corridor of Highway 3 Main Street and is consistent with the PPS 2020 and ROPA 6? If so, where is it? And if not, why not? Has there been consultation with the province with regards to this OP amendment and the protection of the Highway 3 Main Street corridor by requiring, as required by ROPA Amendment 6, Policy 9D13? Can you provide a copy of the province's confirmation of this development? Can you provide a copy of the province's confirmation that this development will not predetermine or preclude the planning and or implementation of provincial transportation or transit initiatives? A well monitoring program is not protecting the aquifer. It is simply just identifying the aquifer as being contaminated. What actual protection measures are being implemented to protect the aquifer? Does all the operating equipment that holds petroleum or other environmentally harmful products that in a breakdown could leak the products onto the quarry floor and into the aquifer have spill containment? Are the vehicles used in the quarrying operation parked on a spill containment pad? Does the loading of trucks hauling the stone take place in a spill containment area? Are the trucks, loaders, and excavation equipment equipped with spill contamination containment have spill contamination features for their fuel tanks? What is the emergency spills procedure for various potential spill situations, such as hauling truck tip over or a ruptured fuel tank? Has the Economic Development Manager of Strategic Initiatives reviewed the economic prosperity of the rehabilitation to recreational passive lakes and long-term use of the depleted pits to any other rehabilitation use? Is there a report by the EDMSI on the long-term potential economic prosperity of this? If so, where is it? If not, why not? Mr. Deputy Mayor, can I ask David Cisco, the IBI group, that's who was first up? David, can I ask him a couple of questions? Is that appropriate at this time?
Sure, Councilor Bogner. We give Mr. Cisco back up here, please.
I thought these might have been brought up, but I didn't hear them, so I'm going to ask you. So this is to do with well monitoring, and I'm not talking about the wells that are on quarry property. I'm talking about the neighbors. Has the wells of neighboring properties been tested for depth and also for how fast they can recharge? Is that something that is done in this process?
So as I mentioned at the start of my presentation, Sean McFarland's here, and he's our groundwater expert. Did you want to respond to that about the external domestic wells?
Hi everyone, nice to be back. I think this is my 5th visit here. So no, we haven't been testing the recharge rate or the depth of wells and anything like that. It's been basically there's been a water level monitoring program that occurs as part of the permit to take water process for the existing quarry, and a well survey where we ask the people questions about whether they're satisfied with their water supply or not, and there's a complaints response program. Sometimes if there's a complaint, we can go in and take a look at the well and see if the levels dropped over time in the well. A lot of times, though, we have to do it right because sometimes they're buried. Got to dig them up. Got to disinfect them later and put a good seal back on them, but it can be done. But generally, that's the sort of thing we would do if a person had a complaint about their supply. If we found the water levels dropped at that point, then we can deepen the well. Sometimes, cleaning or scaling the well can be performed, and sometimes it's a pump problem. But that's normally when we get into that process.
Sure. So just getting back, because when I heard that Jack had a problem and he gets $80, it was really not very useful. But my question is, so I call up, say my well's down. How do you know where it was to start with? Is there a baseline? I've always thought that a baseline would be a good idea. Now you've got an actual something to go by. I had a 25-foot well. Now I've got no water. I got to go to 35, 45 feet to get water. Without a baseline, how do you make a judgment?
We do have a baseline. What we do is we drill boreholes in the ground. We instrument them with monitoring wells, and then we monitor the water levels in those wells, right? And then we contour them up. So if we're seeing a drop in water levels occurring in that area, then we'll know there's a decline occurring in that area. Now, because the rock's fractured, sometimes there'll be a fracture that's connected to the quarry in a particular well sooner than another well, right? And then they'll respond quicker. Or there are other quarries, I work on a lot of quarries, and there's some where you'll get a well that has an issue out 150 meters from the quarry face, and another one can be 20, 30 meters because the fractures aren't connected. So because of the fractured rock, there's variability, and that's one of the reasons that we just don't rely only on the monitoring program. We're pretty serious about having the complaints response program too, and under the legislation, if a quarry operator does interfere with the water supply of a resident, then they have to actually restore that water supply.
Sure. So if someone was to be proactive, and I'm thinking of the people maybe on Miller Road or so, not the ones that are right close to the quarry right now, although that might be useful. If they were to go and get a certified well person to give them a copy of where their water is at today, what the recharge rate is, and then they had trouble, could they use that? Would that be satisfactory to prove that they have been affected if the quarry was unwilling to say that they had caused it? Is that of any use? Because there is a certain cost to that. So.
Yeah, that is a little bit expensive to get a drilling contractor or a well technician to come in and do it, but you could do that. The issues that I see with that all the time, two things. One is you got to turn your well off and let it recover for a while, because the water levels are going up and down in domestic wells like crazy as they're using them. So it's like reading a seismograph a lot of times. So when we're looking at that decline in the wells, what we're looking for is if we see that seismograph, but we're seeing it, if you drew a straight line through it, is it going down? Is it going down or not? And the other thing you want to look at is the head of water, like the water pressure in the aquifer, remaining high as well. So you could have an unaffected well, but you could reduce the level, in the aquifer, and then it would recharge slower. So you're really looking at two things. So yes, you can do it, and you could do that baseline. Another way to do it is if you have a well record around for when it was drilled. They do a test pumping rate at that time, and they did take a static water level at that time, and that's an inexpensive way to have a baseline. we take a look at all the water well records in the area when we do the application. So we got a pretty good idea. So when that happens, that's the sort of things that go back. Say there's a complaint, and then we have in our complaint response program, and they got to call a hydrogeologist to come and look at it. We just don't want to go nuts. It's no problem, right? So then Rankin will, in that case, they'll call up Kevin Fitzpatrick at WSP over the years. He'll go out and investigate it, and they'll determine what to do. But there's a surprising amount. There's not a lot of people there's not a lot of well interference complaints. So we're not sure. But then when we do a survey, sometimes they're saying, oh, we're not happy with our supply. So we're, okay, well, is that just because, the rock's tight to begin with, and the recharge rate's slow because there's quite a layer of clay over it, so it doesn't automatically recharge. So there can be factors that at play with variability in individual wells too. So that's why it's important to look at every well on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. Maybe back to David. It's about the entrance proposed on Highway 3. And just for my own satisfaction, I would assume that if you're getting a number of trucks a day, I heard the word 50 thrown out there, that you would be required to stage those trucks somewhere on your property, and they would leave in an orderly manner. Is that the plan? I don't know, are there trucks just parking on the side of the road to leave when they can't get into traffic, or what's?
John, did you want to respond to that about timing with trucks going in and out of the quarry? Are you thinking about in the morning when they're
I'm thinking
queuing
about
up?
Trucks whenever. Yeah, sorry. Hi, John.
How you doing, Ron? Through Mr. Chair. In the morning, we get a lineup of trucks right now. When it was mentioned, they show up early.
Yeah.
Through this entrance, we'd have to have them come in, line up inside behind the berm, and then they would go through. Currently, they come in, they sit on the road. There's no traffic on, right? We're the only property there. We will definitely set up our scale house back far enough that we can get a lineup of trucks in there. They'll line up, they'll go. Through the rest of the day, we never have that problem. It's just first thing in the morning, somebody tells them to be there at 8 o'clock, but they show up at 7:15, right? It's just human nature. They want to get in line and get going. So we will build an area there that will accommodate the trucks. They'll be able to come in and turn around and get in the line and get out. Because you have to tear them in first thing in the morning, right? So you have to weigh them, and that's their weight for the day, right? It's how it happens, right? So they burn a little bit of fuel, but it averages out that, we're a few pounds, not tons in the difference. So that's the MTO's accepted way of doing it. You tear them in the morning, and you go from there. So it's only one time that you have that problem. It's first thing in the morning, and yes, we'll build enough room. That's the idea of the berm in the front, so we can get them in behind and out of the traffic.
Okay, just before you go, I think the next question's for you maybe too, John. I don't know. So we heard that you want to move the drain and then re-put it back when you're done. Are you picking up the full cost?
That's all on us.
Of all that?
The north
Yep.
swimmer, temporary swing, that's all on us. That's our bill.
Okay, so no
That's already
cost
been
to...
done with you've hired Paul Marsh as your drainage guy. Forget who you gave the one to tonight earlier, but that's the engineering firm that has it. That's on us, and it's written in there.
All right. Thank you very much. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Councilor Bruno?
Excuse me, while I have you guys up here, I want to go back to the entrance onto Highway 3. So if I understand things correctly, you originally planned to exit on Miller Road and then in consultation with the MTO and the region, they wanted you to be on Highway 3? Have we got that correct?
If I recall, MTO was pushing initially for Miller Road, and then with further discussions with JART, with the region, the preference was to go on Highway 3.
So these folks have another, you folks are at another engagement with the region? Is it tomorrow?
Yes.
Yes.
So that question could be asked of the region, because in that case, will the regional planners be there?
Yes, they're here tonight.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So if I can.
Sure.
The city of Port Colborne also objected to it because they were afraid the trucks would turn north and then go down second concession. Where if they go out on number 3, that won't happen. So it wasn't just the region. It was the city of Port Colborne as well. Their road super was worried about that and the traffic that would go down second concession. Because now we don't use second concession. We go out that little bit onto the Highway 140 and we're gone. If there's something in the neighborhood that somebody ordered stone, Port Colborne Poultry, yes, we would go down that way. But as a general rule, our trucks don't go east on second concession.
Thank you.
Okay, councilors, any further questions or comments? Councilor Elliott?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to our planner. If this amendment passes, is there any way that we can attach enforceable conditions to the amendment?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. With respect to the operation of the site, those enforceable conditions are included in the site plans that are approved at the provincial level through their Ministry of Natural Resources ARA application. Through the land use, there aren't necessarily conditions that you can attach to the approval of it. It's more so you're approving the amendment in the way you want. That's how I'd put it.
Okay, I was thinking more along the lines of timelines for certain events to take place. You couldn't do that?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So the amendment goes through, we can't say that you have X number of days, months, years to complete this task.
We can look into that, but I don't think I would suggest getting into the weeds with that in this process. I think that, if anything, would be through the provincial approval.
So we wouldn't have control over anything on the property?
Once it's approved and the land use is in place, then it's essentially, it's in the province's hands to issue a license if they choose. And in that case, then anything is enforced through that.
And I'm not talking about the overall use, but I'm just talking about certain things. Like, obviously, it's agreed upon that there is contaminated land on this piece of property. And I think if you hear the comments that have been made tonight, that is an issue for several people, myself included, that we couldn't put a condition on it that needs to be remediated ASAP. Prior to any quarrying taking place, that piece of property has to be remediated.
I see what you mean. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can certainly look into that. Off the top of my head, I think like possibly a holding provision would be the way to go about that, where the zoning could be, slated for what council wants to approve, subject to the lifting of the holding provision, which you can attach conditions to. That's what I would think of as the mechanism for that at this point.
Okay.
Okay. Don, the applicant, did you want to speak to that? That question?
Just on the contaminated land issue, I just don't know if everyone's aware that we did do a report on that, and we submitted it as part of the package. You may not have seen it. We have been working with Port Colborne as well. We went out and we collected samples. We made recommendations in our report for how to go about a risk assessment and a cleanup as well. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't put in zoning or whatever. I'm just saying that that work was done. And the other thing that I should really point out to you just is whatever concerns that people have about contaminating the groundwater has already been going on for a long time, right? If you have contaminated land, you have downward gradients, you have inward groundwater flow, right? Then any contaminant migration on that land, right, would already be moving down into the bedrock aquifer, right, for some time. So when the time comes when we clean it up, we'll actually make things better because we're removing the source, right? Right? Then it'll be clean. So anyway, I just wanted to point those things out as well, in case you weren't aware of the study and the history there.
Yeah, go ahead.
So your studies did show that there was contaminants on the land.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
So-
related to the racetrack and things like that. The metals, things like that.
So you said that it's been filtering down for years. So why wouldn't you put that as one of your first things to do to remove it, to stop the sediment?
We're
from
intending
filtering
to.
down?
The minute that obviously without a license grant, you don't want to go clean this up in case if you don't get
And hit-
approvals. But
Yeah.
when things are approved, we're planning on doing that right off the bat.
And that's why I prefaced the question with, if the amendment goes through,
Mm-hmm.
can we put conditions on the property somehow that things get done in a certain manner, in a time frame, that we can have a say over?
I think Rankin would agree to that. I mean, I don't want to speak on Rankin's behalf, but or on David's behalf as a planner. I'm not a planner, but technically it makes sense.
Okay, that's it. If we could look into that. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
because we have had those discussions with Rankin. We haven't nailed it down to the specific timing. The one thing that's a little bit we have going for us there is it is quite tight clay. I mean, we did all the archaeology around the site, and the clay's thin, but it's quite tight. So whatever contaminants are there, they have that superficial layer there that's protecting it from the seepage into the bedrock aquifer. At least it's reducing that or retarding it.
Councillor Wagner, once again.
Just before you go, sir, just in that contamination report you did you pick up the berm there of the industrial waste from the wood pulp? That there's a very large berm there?
Think so, yeah.
Full of that stuff?
Yeah, I think
Could
so.
Could you do a little better and think so and send something to us saying?
Well, I'll just look
you
at the
did?
report. I mean, I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
We did the berm. I'm not sure which one. I saw the image there. I'm not sure if it's the same
I think
one we
there's only-
sampled. But no, we sampled the berm. We sampled the pond. We sampled the area right around the speedway itself, right? We have sampled the gravel in the parking lot. So, I mean, we didn't, but what we recommended is, we've done remediation in this area as well. So, we're quite familiar with the materials, and one thing you don't want to do is start to plan a remediation without getting proper sampling, right? So we need much more dense. We've got a phase one. We want to do much more dense sampling to figure out which is clean and can be used and reused on site, and which would need to go to a landfill. Because we don't want to send things to a landfill unless we need to. Not only from the cost side, but we want to send as little clean fill as a society to landfills as possible.
Sure, and just because you're the expert, I'm not the expert, can you send us whether you did that berm or not?
Yeah, and so I'm leading the project overall. I'm really a hydrogeologist. I got our grant, and I worked with our environmental people that are contaminated sites group to do that study. So Byron Sweep's his name, and and I co-authored that. So I'll just talk to Byron. We'll make sure that we get it over to you. It's already been submitted to Port Colborne as well. Port Colborne has it, the planning department, because we've had many discussions about it, and they were quite firm themselves about certain things that needed to happen, and we listened to that and made sure that work was done. Okay.
I don't need the whole report, just tell me about the berm.
The berm, got it. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Hang on, might be one more question for you, Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, through you to Mr. Schultz. David, when you've received these reports on contaminants and all the environmental issues, obviously we don't have in-house staff that can verify that. So do we peer review, or is that a function that the province or the ministry is already doing that?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. So all the technical reports that we've received, that the JART has received, we have either peer reviewed or we have experts from the applicable authority reviewing. So, like for example, environmental reports for the woodland, there are regional staff that are trained in environmental stuff to be able to review those reports. But the ones that are more technical in nature, that they don't have the experts for, or we don't have the expertise to review, they are peer reviewed on behalf of the JART.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Any further questions or comments on this item? Councillor Bogner.
So just one, through you, Deputy Mayor, to David. David, Jack had brought up a concern about that wetland on that point at the north, and the quarry wanting to dig down beside it, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you're trying to keep water up on top of that finger there. Is that something we could deal with as a city somehow to help protect that area?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that is something we can look into with the region. They're the experts in the woodland and the PSW there, so we can certainly look into that for a recommendation report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Do you finish it up, or is it my turn again?
No, I think that's everything from me.
You're done?
Yeah.
Okay. So then we go. So now I guess we'll make a motion to receive the report for information. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion's carried. Madam Clerk, are there any procedural motions or information items this evening?
There is not.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you for attending tonight's public meeting. The meeting is now adjourned.